Welcome to the show. Basic human rights are being disregarded every single day in this country. Now today we have Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice, Roger Malcolm, is here with us. Sir Malcolm, thank you for being here.
No problem.
Basic human rights every single day in this country. Your organization, what is your mission?
Sure. So the work of Jamaicans for Justice is to secure a more just and equitable society at large. And we do that in 4 ways. We help people respond to cases where their rights are being violated or they've suffered injustice. And that is many different things. Land, children, policing, you name it. There's a human right for it more than likely. And the second thing that we do is we train and educate people on human rights to both improve the public awareness and the awareness of those responsible for working for protect our rights, like our police or our JPs or our educators. And we do lots of research on human rights and justice issues to have evidence to make our claims. And then finally, we work to improve laws, policies, and programs and launch campaigns for social justice. So
how is that going?
That's what JFJ does.
Working to improve laws. What's the latest one that you guys are focusing on?
Sure. So we focus on so many laws and policies at a given time, but right now, in this very second, we're attentive to the sexual harassment bill, which is a bill before a joint select committee of Parliament. It was laid about 5 years ago. It's just being considered. It's been on the back burner for some time. And that law is an important law to improve or respond to sexual harassment. It will place legal duties on certain organizations like schools, employers, hospitals, even prisons to respond to sexual harassment. But it has a few flaws, and one of the big ones that we've pointed out is that victims of sexual harassment under that bill will only have 12 months to make a report.
12 months?
12 months, even if they have evidence after the 12 months. And so for comparison, if I breach a contract with you, right? You have 6 years to make that complaint before the court. In this case, it would be a tribunal dedicated for just sexual harassment matters. If I scratch your car, if many have a land dispute, any real tort matter, normally the general statute bar, which is a limitation period after which you can't bring something before the judiciary, is 6 years. We're not sure why we only have 12 months for something so grave as sexual harassment.
That shows that something is wrong.
You can chalk it up to ignorance, oftentimes, or copy and pasting from what they may see in a different jurisdiction. And so it's the work of us and groups like Jamaicans for Justice, which is organized to bring that issue to the forefront, to speak about it. And so it came out very loudly with Delroy Chuck and the criticism he got about his conduct and his comments. But we're focusing on the issue, and the issue is that it's in the draft law that the government tabled and the previous government tabled and then withdrew and then retabled for this 12-month period. And so this is something that could represent an easy win, you know. Politicians have recognized that this is not the best approach. People are speaking about it. So we have just launched a very simple, direct campaign to get as many persons to endorse our open submission, and we'll be bringing it to Parliament this week.
What does the sexual harassment entail?
Sure. So sexual harassment involves any unwanted sexual advance within these organizations. It is not a criminal law bill. A criminal law act would be the Sexual Offences Act, which we already have since 2009. That's where you get stuff like rape, grievous sexual assault, incest, sexual touching, the kind of things that police come for you and carry you away to prison for. This is a civil matter. Yes. and that doesn't have a limitation period. This is a civil matter. So it is, for example, if your child is at school and they've been sexually harassed, and the school will, under this law, have a legal obligation to do something about it, and they don't do something about that, that can be brought before the tribunal, the school can be sanctioned, that teacher can be forced to be removed. Similarly, a doctor on a ward or a caregiver in a nursing home, like your grandparents. So what would happen is that if these groups of persons don't report in 12 months, the ability to get redress and to compel those organizations to do the right thing wouldn't really be enforceable. And for us, I mean, we can give you several reasons why, but a very obvious reason is that we think predatory teachers and doctors should be leaving institutions no matter when their victims report. Take like a grade 6 child who may wait to the next school term to report, or a really sick patient who may not report till they leave the ward because they're afraid. Exactly. This would actually cut off those victims from a viable form of justice. And we don't think that's the intention of lawmakers, but it's our job to point it out and make a lot of noise until it changes. Right, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much for that.
Give thanks.
Right. Now, Roger, Or basic human rights, a lot of us, we don't know our rights, right? Where can we go to learn about some of our basic rights when we're stopped by the police? When we're stopped by the police, what rights do we have?
Sure. So let's take the common example people have. Most people have come to this issue through some interaction with police.
Right.
That's normally how it is. So generally, the police have a legal obligation, a legal power to stop, but they need to have a reasonable suspicion of something to search, because the search is what invades your right to privacy. And so you have a right to privacy, but the government also has a right to invade that right within reason to protect the general good. And so if the police don't have a reason, on some objective reason, to suspect you've done something or you're about to commit a crime, they generally don't have further rights to search and to detain you.
If they stop you,
Yeah.
somebody asked me this recently, if they stop you, can the police search your phone?
Legally, without more than just them stopping you, no. The state can't enforce law and order by breaking law and order.
Exactly.
Doesn't make sense.
When someone is detained by the police,
Yeah.
What rights do they have?
Sure. So let's start with detention without charge. Many people are detained and they're not charged with anything, and they end up being detained for months, sometimes years. We have a client.
How long should I?
24 hours. So this is getting to, so detention without charge, you have 24 hours under the Bail Act, before which you're supposed to charge somebody or bring them before a court. Frequently this doesn't happen, so they come running to Jamaicans for justice. And JFJ lawyers will normally apply for something called habeas corpus, which is Latin for bring the body before court, or may I have the body.
So I have the right to go before a judge?
Yes, a judicial officer who will then either authorize you to be detained for a longer period or normally release you if there's no charge to be proffered. Because the government just can't detain you. You have to have so if I commit a crime, however, and there's evidence and I'm being charged, then you can detain me and then have a court date and then I plead guilty and all that kind of stuff that go through the justice system. But as a free democratic society, our presumption is freedom and liberty. And people forget that that's their God-given right. Frequently, Alric, in our experience, low-income communities, persons who are profiled by the state as criminal communities, just have this right disregarded wholesale. It's not even a thing that exists many times for them.
We take a break. When we come back, we talk more about persons who their rights are disregarded because of where they're from.
Alex Show.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking about human rights in Jamaica. Roger, isn't it a little scary and a little sad to know that just by living in the inner city, or being just the ordinary poor Jamaican, that you're at serious risk with members of our security force?
It is, and these are the persons that we serve every day, who half of the country says always deserves whatever happens to them.
So they deserve what happens to
Yes, it
them?
happens all the time. So a common example, you know, there is a protest in a community. They're protesting that police have come and brutalized their uncles, sons, husbands, brothers, normally the men, or killed somebody. And they want justice. Constant cry, you know. There's some investigation. Many times it turns out that, you know, someone was unlawfully killed and a police officer is being prosecuted. But the response of the country oftentimes is, you know, these people deserved it. What the police need to do, what the police need to do. And as such, we find ourselves in a strange situation of having to choose if we're going to trade off fighting criminals and violence from the public and accept violence from the state. And it's a strange choice to put before people. And for those who are affected, that's not a choice that they have the luxury of making. They are oftentimes faced with high crime that the police need to respond to. But then the state responds oftentimes in violent ways. So let's take, for example, the sanitized term called state of emergency, right? What we have under a state of emergency right now is the scraping up of entire communities, locking them away in detention for weeks and months sometimes, letting them out, re-detaining them. We have had dozens of clients that we've served just since the start of the state of emergency that have been in detention multiple times, sometimes for weeks. They lose their jobs. There's no reason given for the detention. And then when they try to challenge it, all of a sudden they become persons of interest or they become charged with crimes that they know nothing about. And we've had several persons released just from contesting it. And what this shows us is the second a lawyer shows up to contest the detention, 90% I would be willing to say comfortably of our clients are released instantly because there's no basis to have them. But there is the public demand for something to be done, people out of solutions, and so anything that we're thrown with, they eat it up. And they, you know, I'm sure half the people watching here hate groups like Jamaicans for Justice, and they think we're terrible. But you see, many of our clients start out there, and the second they need someone to help protect their rights, they're oftentimes converted. We have a support group for family members of persons unlawfully killed by the state. And many of those members, you know, part of their healing process is admitting that they used to disregard the people they would see on TV until they became that group of persons.
Right.
Trying to get someone in the public to listen to them that, no, you know, when the police burst through their door and shot their son, because their son was known by somebody else and gave somebody else a ride who reported against the police, a real example. Or a father when he called to complain about his mentally ill son, the son was just locked up and just ended up dying after months of disregarding custody. Those people struggle to get their stories heard and believed. And more often they end up needing legal support because victims of human rights violations in Jamaica don't really qualify for legal aid. You don't get a lawyer for free. You get one if you're accused of a crime, which is important, but we don't really have a legal aid system that gives people attorneys. So that's one part of what Jamaicans for Justice is. It is providing pro bono legal support for Jamaicans who need it, because 9 times out of 10 they're extremely poor and they're going up against a powerful system.
And let's talk about even being detained. The detention centers, the lockups, they're in some serious, deplorable conditions. And
they're inhumane.
I know the United Nations wanted some change. Have you seen any change?
So for years, I mean, for decades, long before I've been alive on planet Earth, Jamaica's detention centers have been inhumane. They've been found to be inhumane.
10, 20, 25 men
so
in
many
one.
times. Yeah, it's by so many bodies. And we have had clients who have lost eyes, for example, from just being in there, not getting the medical care. They scratch the eye, they get an infection. It goes serious illnesses that you would shock you. Oftentimes for it to turn out that they were unlawfully detained for years, so they didn't even need to be there. We have not just the places of detention, which are inhumane both for the people detained and for the police officers working there. It's a health hazard for them. We have had places like Central Police Station or other police stations ordered closed by health departments year after year.
Right.
We've had our own prisons found to be incubators of infectious diseases. It is a much larger number than persons would believe of persons who are simply detained without a basis proffered. And you know, this is a system, and so Jamaica has always had these dungeon-style lockups. We've not changed our system of policing, and so people have inherited that, and one police officer in a station can't reconstruct the lockup, you know, and so it's not even to say that there is this individual responsibility of every single person in the system for the condition of the system, but we have not invested in a serious justice system, which includes the police force, that would be humane and human rights respecting. And so we have a situation constantly where persons are victimized by the state, and they just kind of have to choose where they're going to get their violence from. The public at large or the state. Remember, the police force and the justice system are actually our largest public service, meaning we have roughly 17,000 members in our police force. So it is a good microcosm of wider society. And if the wider society is so violent, so callous, so difficult in dealing with interpersonal relationships, it's not surprising that the largest public sector has some of those themes reflected. And so the same attitudes that we're trying to confront in the larger society, we're trying to confront in our workers in the justice system. And so we can't be ignorant to that. We have to actually treat it like the same issue. You know, in 2015, I was doing some research to develop a program on police homicides, which is something that people fund in Jamaica. People fund the work just to reduce police homicides. And it's not just homicides, it's regular abuse that we sometimes don't talk about. But in 2015, when you look on the number of statistics on homicides generally, according to the police statistics, what they reported on as general homicides and what they reported on as security force-related homicides, it was 1/5 for that period, that one specific period in their statistics. And it stood out to me because for this one period, 1 in 5 of the homicides were committed by the state. And so that's a scary prospect. And homicides have reduced largely due to income since 2010. Anybody who looks at the statistics long term will see that. Since Indicom's establishment, we've had less homicides. But what we don't have less of is everyday abuse and detentions, at least in our experience. And the struggle remains incomplete. And so we'll continue to do our legal work. We'll continue to help improve the conduct of our police officers through trainings. And we'll continue not being silent about issues just because the public thinks that people deserve it.
All right, so we take a break. When we come back, we talk more with Roger about human rights in Jamaica. Welcome back to the show. Roger Malcolm is the executive director of Jamaicans for Justice, and he has been helping along with his team to represent a lot of Jamaicans who would have had their rights violated. Let's talk about now the children in our state care. Sometimes you think that these homes should actually be a place of safety, as it is should be, but that's not the case.
So, it's a mixed bag. We have a extremely overburdened child protection system that we have not, as a country, invested in much since independence. So that's the first important point. And so in 2004, which is not that long ago if you think about it, that was the first time we actually tried to regulate our childcare system with a law. If you think about it, that's really not that long ago. And we had the Child Care Protection Act, which sought to regulate things like children's homes and places of safety and create a whole agency just for childcare. At that time, the Child Development Agency, now the CPFSA. However, Jamaican Justice has done about a decade's worth of very, very in-depth research into what you call adverse childhood experiences, anything that bad that happens to a child, basically, inside state care. And what we found is that the trends that we observe for children in state care are very concerning, but it is not a Jamaica issue. It's actually across the world. Institutional care, meaning child care institutions where children effectively are packed up with paid caregivers who are not their family members to care for them, always, according to the data for the past 50 years, is predisposing children to long-term development issues and a greater risk of physical abuse, for example, sexual abuse, neglect, all the things that come from not having a loving and stable family. Even though children's homes do their best, it's just a statistical probability. We just have an issue in law where we don't have a strong and robust system of registration, certification, or even just oversight for caregivers. Certain homes and certain CPFSA sectors will have trainings for caregivers and that kind of stuff. But we believe it should be a national mandate to become a caregiver for a ward of the state, that there are certain basic competencies that need to be developed, basic skills, that would how we regulate other professions like nurses, like doctors, like lawyers. We probably need to regulate the care sector in a better way so that we create the circumstances where people are attracted to this profession who want to deliver a service. Many times, though we have some excellent caregivers, we also have some really not good.
A lot of us, we want things sometimes, and sometimes we have a blockage, but because we don't know our rights of the Access to Information Act of 2002, right? How can we use this to enable us to get justice?
So I'm very happy you raised this. We actually have an ongoing study on this right now, which is a massive national study to do ATI requests to every single government agency everywhere and track the responses over a few years. So it's really going interesting and seeing what the data shows us. But the Access Information Act gives every single person, including non-Jamaicans in Jamaica, the right to access government information, i.e. public documents.
Are there some information that are protected?
There's a certain information related to like national security, proprietary information, financial affairs, personal information about other people.
Maybe like health and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I can't request like a copy of, your passport. Strangely enough, I can actually request a copy of a birth certificate. I don't know why, but you don't have an entitlement to other person's private information under the Access Information Act. And so what we use the Access Information Act to do is to get the truth oftentimes, or at least something close to the truth, not what government says show us the document, show us the information. I want a copy of the minutes of the board meeting of X entity. You know, I want a copy of the receipts of all your travel and your phone bills to see. That's how we knew about, for example, the expenditure that was happening with government officials. That's how, when I first came to JFT as an intern, I had done an ATI study on Christmas parties. And boy, that would shock you. The amount of taxpayers' dollars that was spent on Christmas parties. I mean, we're going into the tens of millions of dollars. And at the same time, we can't fund the basic things like giving a basic stipend for foster carers who don't even get $20,000 per month to care for a family.
They can fund it.
Yeah, they can if they just didn't have an expensive Christmas party. When there is a notion that what you do is transparent, it changes what you do because there is an awareness that people are looking. And so JFJ has operated for years, and we don't do it anymore, a help desk for persons to help them use the ATI app, because we believe that if the country used their ATI rights more, we would actually get much better governance because there'd be a culture.
What would you like to see change for the ordinary man? The ordinary woman.
I'd like that not to be a term, the ordinary man or ordinary woman, because it already starts with what do we want to do? Separating. Yes. And what do we, someone who speaks well, is respectable, has a public profile, what am I going to do for somebody as an act of charity, as opposed to an act of service to restore something that's wrong?
But the system needs to be there for the people.
Absolutely.
For the people, that's the term.
And it needs to be bottom up. And, you know, people say that that's vague, but I actually prefer to start with the root cause, which is we have a political, legal, economic system that is built on inequity. People come around every 5 years to get our votes as currency and do whatever they want with the power and do speech acts to say that they're for us. But actions speak louder than words oftentimes. And for me, centralizing power at the bottom is a larger movement that I can't list out right now that involves learning about Jamaican to justice and being involved in our work. But there are specific things along that pathway that we work on. We'll help you in court because we think that system needs to work. We'll help improve the laws and policies because that's how you get better outcomes. We'll train the people in those systems because that's how we get better actors. Those are specific things that you can do to help improve the system. But let's not fool ourselves that a laundry list of things will change a systemic issue.
Gradual change.
Indeed.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me.
So, I want to thank Roger Malcolm of Jamaicans for Justice for sharing with us today on The Alric Show. The Alric Show will be back next.
Alric Show.